Make sure if everyone would mute their screens. Excellent. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar today on aging services and the great acceleration. We hope that you are staying well and healthy. My name is Jason Gottschalk. I'm the VP of Product Innovation at Petalo, and I'm joined today by Camille Roussel, President and CEO of Petalo. Today's presentation is part 2 in our 3-part series. In the first webinar, we discussed the trend of speed and how that will drive consumer engagement. Today, after a brief recap, we'll be talking about individualization. And our third webinar will focus on how goods and services are losing their materiality and becoming software. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Camille.
Hello, and thanks for joining us today. So again, just to quickly recap, last time we talked about the great acceleration, the new era we're in now, which is mostly around technological and societal trends increasing at a faster and faster rate, or an exponential rate is what we talked about, and how that requires a new type of thinking, and that linear thinking in the age of exponentiation doesn't work for us anymore, and that changes the new norm. And that one of the macro trends coming out of that was speed, and that speed is now a primary driver of customer satisfaction, and we looked at how we can apply speed to senior care to drive customer satisfaction, and what leadership can do to help adapt to that. Today, we're going to be continuing along those lines and looking at some other pieces, starting with exponential technologies, what they are, and some examples of them, and how they're driving our second trend, which is individualization, or how customization is no longer good enough. So exponential technologies are sets of technologies that are growing at exponential rates like many other things, but they have 2 other key qualities. One is that they are enabling new products or services. So they're categorically different from existing pieces. They're not incremental innovation. And many of them are accelerating other unrelated technologies. So they're allowing new things to happen in traditionally slow-moving industries. So one way to think of them is innovation catalysts that are enabling other things to move faster and are part of what are driving the trend of the great acceleration. One of them that you've probably heard of, additive manufacturing. A lot of people refer to this as 3D printing. Has been around for a couple years. It's just recently really hit the tipping point where it's now affordable for home use. You can even have things printed at Staples, so you don't even have to buy a 3D printer anymore. You can ship it to Staples, ship it to Shapeways, and pick up your printed part later that day. It's been traditionally used for rapid manufacturing and rapid prototyping, and one-off manufacturing. So as we move into individualization, the important thing to keep in mind is even physical goods now can be produced one-off and individualized to each person or each use case. And it can be used for on-demand printing to a degree that even the ISS, the NASA space station, has a 3D printer on board. They don't know what they're going to need. They don't know what parts are going to break, but they can now produce those parts in situ on the space station using a 3D printer and some basic components. Unique designs are available through 3D printing. So things like airline parts can be produced that are 30 to 40% lighter, while also being 80% stronger. So it's not just a matter of printing things that are unique, but being able to print and produce and manufacture things we could not do beforehand with traditional manufacturing. It has very little waste. A lot of people may think of little plastic toys you may have seen from 3D printing, but really this works at all scales. We have nanotechnology being used to assemble new molecules piece by piece and atom by atom to create new materials and new molecules. And you have concrete extruders that are now being used to build bridges and buildings. So it happens at all scales, and it's happening across a range of different materials. You can have plastic, concrete, metal. There are now 3D printed chocolates, so you can have individualized chocolates built in 3D structures. So really any kind of material can be used, and material science continues to advance along those lines. And so the idea now is that you can download and print individualized pieces. So if you think of your phone case, for example, you could go online, find a phone case, modify it, or have an artist modify it, and then have it printed on a 3D printer. So you have a unique piece that's individualized to you. I think one of the key ideas, the picture you see here, these valves, are actually coming out of Italy with the COVID crisis over there. They are running out of valve parts for certain ventilators, and the manufacturer just doesn't have any in stock. So a group of folks actually took measurements of the existing valves and started 3D printing these and then mass manufacturing them just through crowdsourcing to help out with the crisis over there. So again, this is a part that just did not exist and was manufactured in a matter of days to create a need and to fill a need in immediate time. So I think this is one of those technologies we need to look at and see how can we use this in senior care. One of the ideas we've battered back and forth is when you look at room options for new people moving in, is there a way to maybe 3D print the different parts or 3D print their furniture so they could even see what a mock-up of their room would look like with their own pieces and what different finishes would look like with 3D printed Lego blocks, for example. Another trend coming along is augmented reality. This is, if you think of virtual reality with the virtual reality goggles, augmented reality is the same thing but without the goggles. And it's available today on your phone. A lot of shops now, if you're buying a couch or you're buying a lamp, you can see it at home where you put up your phone in your room and you can see what that piece of furniture is going to look like in situ in your place. You have different games like Pokemon Go that have come out where people are capturing virtual Pokemon, walking around and using their phones to see these fake objects in real life. But there's other applications that are much more serious. There's a great TED Talk out there you can look up called color-coded surgery, where they're using augmented reality where surgeons can flip between color filters to see nerve endings, they can see veins, they can see musculature, all color-coded to help prevent accidents and improve the accuracy of surgery. This is a technology that's rapidly developing. And like I said, most people think of this as goggles on your face, but realistically, it's on every phone produced today. Areas where this could be of interest is virtual tours. Construction companies are doing a lot of this for pre-construction work, where you can see how your office space would be laid out or how a redesign would look by walking around with VR goggles on. Virtual museums or historic events are being done through this. And the other area is really enhanced training, where you can have training for staff in a much more realistic environment. And taking the idea of color-coded surgery, what other complex medical tasks or repeatable tasks do we do in senior care that could be augmented with a virtual reality app like mechanics would do for servicing an airplane to help staff perform their duties more accurately? Robotics, which is really the interface of software with hardware. So where are we able to take software and let it touch out into the real world? Suitable Technologies has these telepresence robots, like you see on your screen. Telepresence, telehealth, a big driver right now. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Even after things calm down, I think there'll be a lot more interest in how do we do things remotely? How do we take our doctors and make them available across multiple facilities? If you're a multi-site facility, do you need doctors showing up at each facility, or is there a way to really have them do rounds through a telepresence robot and telehealth? Driverless cars are another interesting piece. It turns out a lot of driverless car technology has to do with mapping the environment around you, and in a closed place like a campus, where we're well advanced on how we can map something like a campus to provide transportation on campus to your residents, or driverless delivery bots, where if someone wants something from the concierge, you have a short stay rehab staff that wants a Coke, is this something that staff need to be addressing, or is that somewhere where robots could be stepping in? Artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a big, broad term, and everyone kind of defines it how they want. The whole idea is really how do we get from the current Alexa devices that can, order you an Uber to the next generation Jarvis that can answer any question. At their core, a lot of it is the same algebra you saw in high school. So matrix and linear algebra is all it is. It's just done on a very large scale. And we're able to do that now because of the amount of computing power we have. So we can do a lot of calculations in a very short amount of time, but the underlying math is not very complicated. Artificial intelligence really excels at today at classification and pattern recognition. Is this a cat versus a dog? One thing, but is this cancer in a lung on an MRI image? Are the types of questions that this can answer very well today. And the other piece is how do we transform this flood of data, and we're going to talk a little more about data in the next slide, that's coming at us and converting it into usable information. And one of the key areas with that is classification and pattern recognition. So AI is one of these underlying technologies that's going to enable other technologies to perform better. If you look at legal cases today, for example, paralegals used to go through thousands of documents. You have software now that can do that in a faster time, more accurately. every time until recently, every day I leave for work, my phone knows, well, you're going to be driving home. So they provide on my GPS navigation directions for home with current traffic conditions, but it also knows Thursdays I typically would go to the gym. So it can automatically populate where I'm most likely to go rather than home just by recognizing simple patterns in my routine. And I think if we look at it, there's a lot of pattern recognition that happens in senior care. In healthcare, we have to be extra careful. It's not something you want to apply unduly. You want to make sure you're doing proper medical diagnosis. But even in the billing office, if you look at the amount of time of billing, coding, and answering questions around that line, that's an area where artificial intelligence could probably excel today to alleviate some of those tasks and free up your office staff to do more productive value. Another area might be trend identification. So if you look at seasonal admission trends of what your occupancy looks like, how can you identify how seasonal trends, weather, or everything else is applying to those trends so you can plan ahead of time and know how to target your marketing and sales campaigns more accurately? The Internet of Things is another exponential technology. And this is really the idea about tiny sensors able to measure everything everywhere. The sensors are available today. They're found throughout a number of different products. Even your car today has a number of sensors inside that report to an internal computer. Part of the tipping point for this will be when wireless communication becomes cheaper and more readily available. The deployment of 5G technology gets us very close to that, so that all these sensors can now communicate back in real time over the internet. If you look at a modern F1 race car today, it has over 300 sensors that produce over a gigabyte of real-time data during a race. And this allows them to modify the car's performance for drag based on current wind conditions, temperature conditions, and a number of other pieces. So where else could we be applying that today? You experience this every day in your real life, whether you know it or not. For example, a lot of the real-time traffic information you get from pieces like GPS or Google Maps is actually done by taking all the different phones people have in their pockets and using those as global sensors to determine how traffic is flowing in current conditions. New technology such as Amazon's Just Walk Out shopping, where you can go, walk into a store, you pick up what you want off the shelf, and you walk out. You never see a transaction. You don't even check yourself out. They're just able to know what you've picked up and walked out with to charge your card. Will probably redefine how shopping works. And the trends we're seeing today with social isolation and social distancing are probably going to accelerate these types of technologies. I think if we go look at what we're doing today, what kinds of goods and services could we enable auto shopping for? Within our own convenience stores, within our own markets, is that something where we need staff to be manning those, or could we use something like Amazon's Just Walk Out technology to improve the experience today? And where else do we have existing sensors today that could provide useful feedback if we just manage to network them? A lot of complex utility sensors in facilities today. Are those being put to best use to deal with seasonal weather, for electrical trends, for measuring, where is electrical usage being used? How can that best be optimized? IT is another area where there's a flood of data. Are we converting that into useful information? If you are leasing servers on the cloud, for example, do they need to run 24/7, or is that something where they could be shut down or reduced in capacity at night to save on costs? And finally, synthetic biology. It turns out that most medication does not work for most folks. Everyone's biomes are different, their genomes are different. And one study says that up to 50% of drugs basically don't work for most folks that take them. We're already seeing trends for this. Tamoxifen is a cancer drug for breast cancer that is ineffective in 65% of women. And it turns out it has to do with your genome. So they are now genotyping folks before cancer treatment to identify which drugs will work and which won't. So we have effective drugs that will work well for folks, and we can avoid giving folks drugs that don't. This is going to radically change how pharmaceuticals work in the future. The plethora of drugs people take today will probably be able to be reduced. Pharmacological side effects will be reduced, but it's going to introduce new aspects. We are already familiar with the burdens of HIPAA and how much that puts on us. There's other laws like the GINA Act in the US, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, and that's going to introduce new rules and regulations on us of how do we manage all this new genetic information so we can provide better health care. What kind of new skills are going to be required in the workforce as genotypes become a key part of healthcare delivery? So I think the key takeaways on these is that leveraging these key technologies can accelerate innovation in other areas. So even though you may not think of yourself as needing 3D printers or virtual reality goggles, is that something that you should be investigating today to see what they're doing later? Current technologies, sorry. And we're only starting to understand the impact of these. So just like we talked about last time, with exponential technologies, there's kind of a tipping point where they're very deceptive today, but as the price point comes down and their prevalence increases, they're going to play a larger and larger role in what we're looking at. So how do we prepare for this? How do we prepare for the age of individualized medicine? Is this something where everyone coming into our facilities gets a cheek swab and a DNA analysis, through 23andMe or other medical providers? Is that something your folks are going to want that you could start offering today just to introduce the idea in there? United Therapeutics, based out of Rockville, is developing 3D lung tissues, and what they've created is future labs within their facilities with areas like VR kits and all these future exponential technologies that are just there for staff to play with, to act as generation for ideas. So what can people come up with that maybe you're not thinking of, but when people are exposed to the technology and they become aware of what it's capable of, how are we going to generate innovation internally in our organization? And finally, as the Internet of Things comes online and all these other technologies, how are we going to take the increased amount of data? We're already flooded with data. We're going to have more of it. How are we going to turn that into actionable information that's actually useful for facilities? So part of what these technologies are enabling is the second macro trend we want to talk about, which is individualization. And we really went from an era of mass production to mass customization, but what we're seeing now is the era of mass individualization, where customized product is not enough. You really want products that are individualized to each specific user. And on the surface, this seems very daunting, but it turns out it doesn't take that much personalization to really make something unique to an individual. If you look at the world population today, for example, it's made up of about 8 billion people. And if you were to ask 33 yes or no questions that divide the population in half each time, you could narrow down with 33 questions, one individual out of 8 billion. So by just taking a few things and having options between them, you can actually tailor products to a very unique individual without doing a whole burden of work. I think one of the people that does this the best is actually the M&M company. At their core, since World War II, they make chocolate candies covered in a hard candy shell. They know what their core product is. They stick to it, but they found ways to innovate around marketing and product while sticking to their principles along many different lines to really offer a personalized experience. They tend to produce new product packaging that's limited edition to coincide with movie releases or things happening at the time for the Olympics, for example. So from a marketing perspective, they are always adapting to their environment. They offer the M&M configurator. So if you want to have M&Ms for a special event, such as a wedding or for a celebration at work, you can choose the colors. You can choose the picture that goes on instead of the M for a truly individualized experience, which at the end of the day is still just M&M candies. They offer a variety of different sizes of candies and different packaging sizes as well. So you can have mini M&Ms in a tiny size. You can have giant M&Ms, in a Costco-sized bag the size of your head. There are some variations around product lines. So, do you want white chocolate versus dark chocolate, or the inclusion of peanuts, for example? But again, same product at its core, but offered in a variety of different sizes. The other key piece is they're willing to experiment with many different types and adopt products that work. For example, when the Shrek movies came out, they made giant Shrek-sized M&Ms as a product material. And what they found was that for older adults, not necessarily seniors, but for adults themselves, they preferred the larger candies as a more traditional type chocolate. So they now offer jumbo M&Ms that were based off that Shrek product because it worked successfully in that test market. At one point, they also offered premium M&Ms, which were M&Ms with premium chocolate, and that did not really take off. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a bag today. So they're willing to experiment with different pieces off their core products. I think that's an area where we can look at senior care and where can we offer multiple variations off of our own products and services that share the same common core. So at the end of the day, we're delivering healthcare, we're delivering compassion, but how are we packaging that in different ways so our core services remain the same, but the product that we're delivering appears different and differentiated to meet individual needs? Are the sizing options we offer for the different services we offer correct? And do we offer enough of them? Sometimes more service and sizing options is all that's needed to really tailor a product to individual needs without changing the core underlying mechanism. digital cosmetics. So we're going to delve into the area of video games right now, but I think there's a lot of key lessons we can learn here. There was a video game released in 2012 called Team Fortress 2. It was a $20 video game. And after about a few years of release, they decided to re-release the game for free. So now you could download the game, cost you nothing at all. In the game, there were cosmetic items you could buy, so digital hats to put on your head. They did not impact gameplay. They did not make a person more powerful, purely cosmetic. And what they saw was when they were charging for the video game, they were making about $50 million a year in revenue. And they didn't release final numbers, but they said when they went free to play, that their revenue increased 12-fold, which is a pretty dramatic increase. And they attributed that to a couple different areas. One was that when you are producing a limited good, your only customers are who you can acquire that's new. So who else is going to buy this game who has not bought it before? If you look at an IL setting, for example, the only thing you can sell is what units you have free and available on the market. And that they saw as introducing a key tension between how much strategy and focus is based on future customers versus supporting our current customers and what they need. So by making the game free to play, there was no barrier to acquiring new customers, and the whole focus could be on those who are actually interacting with your product, already engaged with your brand, and they saw a significant revenue increase for that. And that's not just a one-off. If you look at the game Fortnite, if you have any kids, you're probably familiar with the game Fortnite, another game that's free to play, free to download, available across many devices, including phones. And what they offer are cosmetic items. Again, they don't make you more powerful. They just let you customize your character to your needs to look like what you want. And with that, they are pulling in, it was estimated in 2018, somewhere between $500 million to $2 billion in revenue in cosmetic goods. So the lessons I think we need to look at that is that cosmetic and non-tangible alterations to existing product offerings have real value to customers. It's something that they're willing to pay for, even when it has very limited tangible value or even real world value to them. It is something where personalization and the ability to do so has real value that we can take advantage of. The other piece is a lot of these are based off small transactions. I don't know that everyone loves microtransactions, but there is apparently a lot of revenue, a lot of business to be done at the small scale. We like to do things in big because it's efficient, it's easy to do. But I think facilities still need to look at how can we capture small revenue streams? Are we making that easy to do? Do we have the capability to do that? And then looking at our pricing models, is the all-in pricing model, pay-as-you-go, and so on, the best pricing model? Is it really what your customers want today? And how are you validating that data? Because obviously different pricing models that seem radical at the time, such as releasing a game for free, if done correctly, can significantly increase revenue versus traditional concepts. And then how much of your strategy is focused on bringing in new customers versus supporting the customers you have today? And how do you alleviate the tension between those two groups? When we talk about individualization, individualizing to the customers is important, but so is individualizing to the times at hand. So the idea of zeitgeists or moments in time and how you can take advantage of that. The best example I know of is this $1 million homepage. So this was done by a high school senior. He was going into college, needed a way to fund it. So he came up with the idea of a million pixels, 1,000 by 1,000 grid, and he would sell each pixel on this homepage for $1. So for $1, you could buy a specific pixel. It would create whatever color you wanted, and it would link back to whatever site you wanted. And his whole thing was own a piece of history. And it turns out he managed to sell out the whole homepage, and it became so popular that the last few pixels actually were auctioned off on eBay. So he ended up bringing in over $1 million by selling 1 million individual pixels. It's a pretty genius idea. It's not something that's repeatable. It was really just a capture of moment in time. And I think there is a division in senior care that does this very well, and that's our philanthropy and development groups. They can identify, pieces of history or one moments in time to do fundraising with, but is that something the rest of your facility really knows how to appreciate and how to take advantage of as well? So a very interesting concept. Another area is hyper-personalized marketing. So until very recently, we had the Share a Coke With campaign. Coca-Cola now has their letters spaced out with their new slogan of staying apart is the best way to stay connected. You see many marketing campaigns adjusting to the real times. KFC, I believe, has dropped their finger licking good campaign, no longer really appropriate for today's day and age. But it turns out that the Share a Coke With, which is not a radical redesign, what it did is just add names to Coke bottles. So they picked out the most popular names, they put them on Coke bottles. This simple idea led to the first revenue increase for Coca-Cola in over 4 years when it was first launched. The ability to identify with a specific name an individual really has strong draw power for individuals. So is that something we can offer ourselves? Where can we offer hyper-personalization? If we look at in-room guides, for example, is that something that's generic to your, all residents, or is that something where using, a bit of flashy programming to modify a video on the fly, or, custom printing, can we do in-room guides that are personalized to the person coming in? So it's got something even as simple as their name or a few pieces of their information, so they truly feel that it was taken for them. Reserved seating for events. There's no need to develop this on your own. Every restaurant under the sun has this figured out. But for your dining programs or for other life enrichment activities are you doing, do you offer things like personalization for personalized seating or reserved seating so people can really feel like they have a unique experience for how they're engaging with you? Loose coupling, this is a term really from programming. The idea is you take something that's monolithic, so you take something like a car that's usually thought of as a single product, and you break it up into its individual parts that can work together, but can advance separately. The best example of this in your everyday life is Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, depending on what type of phone you use. Almost every modern car in production today uses this. And what this has done is really decoupled or loosely coupled the entertainment system from the car to your phone. Cars are not something we purchase very often. The idea of updating your car for new software is not something that's really in the American psyche. And car companies, quite frankly, are not great at designing software. They can make great cars, they're not great software companies. But now you can have your Apple or your Android experience. It knows everything about you. It has your music with you. It can be updated every night as it charges on there, providing real-time navigation, audiobooks, everything you want right in your car experience, because we've decoupled those two products. So it can be personalized, it can be relevant, and it can advance at a different rate than car technology itself does. I think there's a lot of areas, same in senior care, where we have these monolithic programs. How do we break that up into smaller chunks so individual pieces might be able to advance more rapidly and more accurately than the whole could on its own? When we think of the continuum of care, it truly is a continuum. It's not like these hard breaks. So if you look at something like independent living versus assisted living, where does that line happen? And with services like community-based services, can we decouple different things we would think of as bundled into AL into really supporting IL across a broader continuum? Things like your meal plans tied into your housing allowances, are those really segmented enough that you can individualize each of those components to your individual customers? Accessibility drives demand. So two parts to really learn from Apple Music and Spotify. One is that accessibility really is a driver of demand. So music pirating and video pirating, the biggest impact that's happened to reduce pirating was the introduction of Netflix and streaming music. It turns out that something that's affordable and readily available, where you don't have to jump through hoops, where your DVDs aren't geographically encoded, so if you happen to live in Europe, you can't see the latest movie from America, did more, limiting those barriers, did more to eliminate piracy than anything else. There's an example of the $300 million button. So there's a major retailer that up until recently, would have a login to complete your purchase. You've shopped, you've filled up your cart, now you have to create either a login to check out, and they introduced the guest checkout button. You see this all over the place now. And by introducing a guest checkout, they were able to increase annual revenue by $300 million a year, because people were not abandoning their shopping carts by saying, well, I don't want to sign up, or I don't remember my password. You can just check out. How do you reduce the barriers between people's wants and their actions? And the other piece is recommendation options. So now you have all this music available to you. How do you know what to listen to? Well, Spotify recommendations help introduce new music. And I think a lot of the times we think about our business all the time. We know what we offer, but our customers aren't. They're just living their lives. So are we providing the right information of what's available at the right time? So if you think of someone transitioning out of short-stay rehab, maybe that's the time that you're introducing your home and community-based services options, or you're, thinking about it. You look even from inside. A classic example, tools for bringing in new candidates. And if it would be interesting, I think, to get them ask you to upload your resume and then fill in all the information you just uploaded, for example. So you're creating a predictive analytics. out habits are extremely sticky. If you think of the deodorant you use, you probably buy the same one, probably even the same scent every day, and you're not going to change that. You're not going to buy what's on sale, most likely. There are key times where habits can change, and then the new norm becomes what sticks. Sometimes this happens, for example, sticking to the deodorant example, if you're traveling, you're out of deodorant, you go out and buy something new, it works well for you, you might change your habit then, but changing habits is very hard, and there's only key times where that can happen. Target recognized this. They identified pregnancy as one of those key times where shopping behaviors change. So they have an internal tool called the pregnancy predictor. And there have actually been times where Target's been yelled at by parents saying, why are you sending all these pregnancy tools to or all these pregnancy ads to my daughter? What are you trying to do? And it turns out that Target knows that someone is pregnant before sometimes their parents do. That's how good they are at this. They started offering things like lactation rooms within stores to help encourage new mothers to go shopping there. Again, because they identified that this is a key area where where habits are going to change. So how do we bring in that audience? How do we guide them towards us? It's a bit dystopian in the Target example, but it is a key highlighter of how this works. In senior care, we actually have a lot of areas where this happens. For example, every transition of care is eventually and potentially a traumatic experience for folks. It's certainly an area where habits are going to change. How are we taking advantage of that? If you look at population health, for example, every transition of care is an opportunity to introduce new healthy habits that would have long-term impact for folks and for your community, and one of the few times where those changes in habits are likely to stick. And then ground truth. In our business here at Pello, we go talk to leaders all the time, and we ask, how are you guys accomplishing X, Y, and Z? And leadership, executive directors will tell us, oh, we do A, B, and C. And then we'll go down and we'll talk to the nurses and say, okay, how are you guys achieving X, Y, and Z? And like, well, we really should be doing this, but here's how it really works on the floor. Healthcare is complicated. There's a lot of ask for staffing. The reality on the floor doesn't always match up with the ideal in the corporate office. And this isn't unique to healthcare. So there's an Asian group that used to sell or that rents cars. And they did a study because they started looking at their data and they saw that, about 12% of their car rentals were driven 0 miles. So people were renting the cars and putting no miles on the cars, and they really didn't understand what was going on. You rent cars, what are they doing with them? And it turns out they're using them for a number of different things. So some folks are using them for short stay rest. So, at the airport, maybe I need to work for a few hours. I want to catch a little bit of sleep. For a 4-hour layover, well, you can rent a car for 4 hours. You do that as opposed to renting a room, and it's cheaper and more easily available. In a lot of cities during power outages, people were renting cars just to charge their electronic devices so that they could still be on their phones. They could still watch Netflix during a power outage because the car can provide power through a gas-powered engine. Other areas, crowded areas like Tokyo, where privacy really is at a premium, people were renting cars just for, practicing singing or practicing foreign language to have a space of privacy, or for things like AC. AC is not as prevalent in a lot of countries as it is in the US. So just being able to have a reprieve of the heat in the environment and renting a car to do so. So a number of different factors were happening for car rentals that had nothing to do with actually driving a car and more had to do with privacy and availability of electricity and AC cooling. The whole point of this is that you offer a product and you have an idea of how you want it to be used, but how do you really know what is happening on the ground? How do you know how people are really using your product? And are your expectations and the reality well aligned? And what tools do you have in place to help support that? So key takeaways between the introduction of exponential technologies that are allowing really one-off pieces and just clever marketing and clever packaging, individualization is really the newest trend that's overtaking customized service. People really want to feel like things are tailored to them and have a bespoken experience. And there are now ways to deliver that without breaking the bank or introducing too much complexity. Customers are placing more and more value on non-tangible goods. Things, you hear things are not great gifts, experiences are. It's this part of the same trend of, are you valuing the right things? Are you providing the right value to your customers, or are you just trying to provide a more traditional experience? And then focus on your customers' actions, not your own expectations. It's really key to look at the customers, look at your frontline staff, go talk to your customers and see how are they using your products? What do they value from you versus what you think they should or what you think they do? Some key questions, how can you support working seniors within your offerings? do you have the right pricing models? I really think pricing is one of those areas where there's a lot of room for flexibility. It doesn't really necessarily redefine how you do operations, but do we have the right models in place? Dynamic pricing is another area that I think scares a lot of folks. Some companies do it very well. The kind of trend towards cloud computing is really based around dynamic pricing and paying for what you need. We talked to some home health companies that really struggle with those key times. You know, there's certain times where everyone needs service, and then you have these blackout periods where you have no service. Could you use dynamic pricing to help alleviate some of those pressures if you're clever about how you do that? And then how are you getting an accurate picture of the ground truth? Do you have the right sensors in place? Are you gathering the right data? Are you converting that into the right information? We'll turn it over to Jason.
All right, well, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your time. We hope that you can join us for part 3 of this series, focused on goods and services rapidly becoming software. That will be hosted on April 23rd at noon, and you can sign up now at pedalo.ai/webinar. If you'd like the slides from this presentation, we'll be putting those up this afternoon. You can follow the link that is showing on your screen. And again, the slides from part 1 at the link also on your screen. And if you have any questions or would like to further discussion, please don't hesitate to contact us, either myself, Jason, or Camille at info@pedalo.ai. Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.